it's all black and white.
Yeah.
He thinks that's less attractive to the eye, and so you spend less time on it.
I found the red notifications really draw me in.
Reddit?
The red notifications, it attracts the eye.
Yeah, notifications are bad news in general, yeah. But good for you. Good for you. I mean, it's an amazing invention. It could be used very well, but it could also be abused. And we have to learn how to manage this new technology. It's not so new, but we're still dealing with it. Okay. Okay, Tov. We're getting started, a new week, learning Torah. Hopefully we'll have good news from the front. We'll be successful in the war quickly. And we'll be able to spread the light of Torah to all the Jewish people and to the rest of the world as well. Hananel, good morning. How are you? Nice haircut. I like your haircut. Somebody here in the Machon, or you went to a barber? In Yam Melech now. Shalom, Boker Tov. We're starting a new topic of one of the 39 categories of prohibited work on Shabbat. And that is the category called Bishul, cooking. Actually, if you remember the list, of course you all know it off by heart already, 39 categories of work. You wrote it down. So the end, the number 11, the end of the first 11, on page 161, chapter 10. In the previous chapter, we had a list of the 39 categories of work. And I said the first 11 is a series that lead of all sorts of activities which lead you to producing bread. Sidur de Pat, it's called. You have to plant the wheat, you have to plow, you have to harvest the wheat, you have to thresh it, etc. You have to grind it, you have to make it turn into flour, and then you knead it with water, make dough, and then eventually you bake the bread. And the baking is number 11, ofeh. However, as we're going to see in this chapter, it's not only baking. What is baking? You take raw food and you make it edible with fire. That's basic definition. We're going to see the basic definition of what's cooking, what's prohibited cooking, is whenever you take food which is inedible and you make it edible using fire, cooking on fire. So baking is the way we bake bread. You put it in an oven without a pot necessarily. Usually you just sort of make the dough and it sits inside the oven. Different types of ovens. Ancient times you would take the dough and you'd attach it, you'd stick it onto the side. They still have ovens like this in some parts of the world. Here in Jerusalem, there's a bakery that you could still see this being done. You take a ball of dough and you sort of slap it onto the side of the oven itself. The oven is made of stone, or usually, and it's heated up with fuel. And when it bakes, you peel it off the side of the oven. Nowadays, most ovens, we have a rack, and we have maybe a baking dish or something, but this is baking. There's dough, and there's fire, and it becomes bread. Our sages understand that we don't limit this malacha, this category of work, to only bread, but it also refers to other foods. Other foods are usually cooked with fire in a pot with water. Make a soup, make a stew. How do you prepare meat? You can roast it on the fire, but you can also boil it up and stew it up. And so basically all different types of cooking with fire are prohibited, and that's why the name of the chapter is not ofeh, but bishul. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I remember you.
Welcome back. That's nice.
Welcome back. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good.
Please introduce yourself to the new guys.
My name is Dmitry Yakov. I'm from Ukraine, and I have been living here in Israel for 2 years, while mostly working and catching some Hebrew from, from the air, I would say.
Okay.
That's me.
And you have time to study with us once again? You came
Yeah.
for a while, and then you got a job? Is that what happened? What happened?
I changed my second job. Now I'm a babysitter.
Oh, okay.
And the first job is still the same. I'm a computer engineer.
Right, but in terms of your time here in Machon Meir, you have the ability to study with us?
Yeah, for a few hours in the morning, I guess. With
Oh.
God's help, is that true?
Great. Okay, I'll just ask you to speak to Rabbi Lissman after class. And he'd love to welcome you back personally, I imagine. Okay? Anyways, so yeah, we're just learning about the laws of Shabbat now, for a couple of weeks. And we're about to start the laws of cooking or baking, as we saw it in last week. This week, the title is most common foods, most foods that we prepare with cooking. The difference between cooking and baking is whether there's water involved. Okay? So let's take a look. Let's see, chapter 10, section 1. Hananel, want to start us off and read for us, please?
Introduction: a great deal of your food animal eat their food raw in its natural state, but it is insufficient for men, whose nature is far more refined and complex. Man must produce his own food. First, he must prepare the ground, and he must remove the stones and the plow wheat and prune. Yet even after the wheat has ripened, it is still not fit to be eaten. In order to obtain the edible kernel, he must thresh and winnow. Even then, the grain remain inedible until they are cooked. To make bread, he must go further. He must grind the kernel, remove the half sieve and the flour, knead the dough and bake it.
Okay, we're gonna skip this next section. It's a long process, and he's saying that on Shabbat we want to transcend that level of where we have to involve ourselves with so much of the physical development and processing, and remain attached to Hashem, who created all this. So I don't want to get into all the philosophy that he brings in section 1, so we're going to skip it. As you can see at the end of section 1 on the next page, the first 11 melachot are about growing food, and 3 additional melachot later on are also about food, trapping, slaughtering, and skinning with the animals. But we start with bishul because this is the most relevant of the 11. The 11, of course, do we plow that much? Not so often. Do we sow? Most of us are not farmers, and therefore that whole processing before we get to the bottom line of taking the raw materials and baking them or cooking them, that's the most dangerous of the 11 is the end, the last one, because we're not farmers. But on Shabbat, also the laws are much more complicated about bishul. We're going to see something that we want to do is cook up our food, and so we have to be very clear about how and how not to prepare our food on Shabbat. Okay, section 2, the general principles of bishul. So, Dimitri, will you read for us section 2, please?
Bishul is the malakha that prepares or improves food, whether through sitting, baking, or roasting. What defines this malakha is that food is prepared by means of fire's heat. The food is softened by the heat, and the tastes within it merge to create a new taste, which is intense and contains a variety of flavors. Cooking usually softens food, and most foods remain soft after being cooked. However, the process of roasting softens the food at first, but eventually makes it tougher. Torah law prohibits cooking, and this prohibition even includes foods that can be eaten raw if cooking improves them in some way. For example, although one can certainly drink cold water, nevertheless, since cooking improves the water, doing so is prohibited by Torah law. Cooking foods that are not improved by this process is not prohibited by Torah law, but it is still prohibited rabbinically. One who cooks using fire or something that was heated by fire transgress a Torah prohibition. Therefore, if one heats a frying pan on the fire, then turns off the fire and fries an egg in the hot frying pan, he has transgressed a Torah prohibition. This is the case even though the pan was no longer on the fire during the actual frying. Concerning cooking in the sun, see section 25. Any accepted form of cooking is prohibited by Torah law. Therefore, one who cooks in the microwave transgresses Torah prohibition, because nowadays this is one of the normal ways of cooking. Before we explain the laws of Bishu in detail, we will preface them by saying that there are three types of prohibitions relevant to Bishu. Bishu by Torah law. Second, rabbinic enactments that forbid doing anything that might cause someone to turn up the flame, literally to stir the coals. The third, rabbinic enactments that forbid doing anything that resembles cooking. To determine whether one might do a particular action, he must examine it from these three perspectives. To override, one must clarify if this action is forbidden because it qualifies not b'shas b'shul. Any action that leads to food's transformation from a raw state to a cooked state is prohibited by Torah law. This is on Shabbat, right?
Yes, on Shabbat, of course. Yes.
This prohibition and those deriving it from will be explained in section 13 below. From the perspective of the Torah prohibition of the shul, one might leave food on the fire when Shabbat begins with the intention that it will continue cooking on Shabbat. However, the sage prohibits doing so when it might be necessary to adjust the heat due to the concern that one might forget it in his Shabbat and turn off the flame. Thus, the transgressing the Torah prohibits on Ma'ariv and Yeshua. But if fire is covered, as it is in the case of plata, warming tray, one must place food on it because there is no chance that he will forget it is Shabbat and turn off the flame. Even if food is fully cooked, and thus there is no concern that one will turn off the flame, the sage still forbids doing anything that looks like cooking. Therefore, one might not put fully cooked cold food directly on the fire. However, one may put such food far from the heat source in such way that it does not look like cooking. As we will explain in section 18:21, there is disagreement whether placing food on a plata looks like cooking and it is thus forbidden.
Okay, so well done. So we have basic principles, preparing food that's going to change the food. But even if it doesn't change it that much, but it gives it an added benefit. For example, water is actually, it should be an exception. You'd think water is the same. Nothing really changes. An egg, okay, it was in one state. It was raw. When you cook it, it tastes different. Same thing with a potato. You can't eat it raw. When you cook it, it's edible, it's delicious. A chicken, it's raw, you can't eat it. But when you cook it up, it gets ready. And you do that by use of fire. Those are classic examples. Water is a little bit of an exception. But even water, we assume that cooking water, boiling it up, it adds a certain enhancement. I'm drinking tea that's hot, not cold, because I prefer it, because it has a better taste, because it gives you an added benefit. So even water is considered to be cooking. And one exception, it has to be through the use of fire. One exception, this is a major innovation by Rav Moshe Feinstein. We read about it, and that is the question came up when they created microwave ovens. You can cook an entire dinner, chicken, you can cook anything you want in a microwave oven. There's no fire. Microwave oven doesn't work that way. the microwave, they agitate the molecules inside the food, and that cooks it from the inside out. But there's no fire anywhere. So many rabbis, until today, believe that it's not actually prohibited from the Torah, because from the Torah, the Torah only spoke about what's normal way of cooking, which is with fire. And for thousands of years, civilization has cooked food, prepared food for eating by fire. But Moshe Feinstein came along and said no. Once the microwave ovens were created, they become standard way to prepare food. So any way that's a normal way of preparing food is biblically prohibited. It's a big chidush. And so of course we don't cook food in the microwave, but it is relevant still in cases of need. For example, if somebody's sick and you have a choice, should I cook them up the chicken, in the fire, in the oven, which is lighting a fire, or in the microwave? It's better to do it in the microwave because according to the strict letter of the law, if you disagree with Rav Moshe Feinstein, then it's not prohibited biblically, it's only rabbinically. So that's a little bit of a unique, new situation where you can actually cook without fire. Everything else, if it's not fire, it's derivative of the fire, which is also prohibited. It's called toldot ha'esh. So that's one issue. The other thing is that he makes very clear here is that when we want to keep Shabbat and we want to refrain from cooking, we're not only refraining from the actual melacha, we have a rabbinic level too, which we're not allowed to violate. The rabbis made specific laws that prohibited, for example, states, not even actions, states of affairs. For example, to leave a pot of uncooked food on the fire, even if you put it there from before Shabbat. If it's uncooked, then we're worried that maybe on Shabbat, the rabbis came along and said maybe you'll stir up the coals. In the ancient time when we were cooking with coals. It's very attractive because you want it to be ready right away. You want it to eat quicker. You're hungry. So this is a classic example of a rabbinic law to distance you from the actual act of cooking. There's rabbinic prohibitions. And then there's a third level, which is also rabbinic, and that is that you're not allowed to do things which look like cooking. And so we're gonna see these different levels as we progress through the laws of cooking. But it's good to have our basics starting from the beginning. So we have Torah law, we have rabbinic law, and rabbinic strictures of various kinds. So far, so good? Okay? Questions, comments?
There is a obligation to eat 3 meals on Shabbat.
Right.
But cooking food is considered very strong breaking of Shabbat. So
Correct.
even if you have to prepare food for yourself in order to fulfill the commandment to eat 3 meals, you shouldn't do that, and you should start rather than cook food. Absolutely.
Correct. This is more powerful, the prohibition of doing work on Shabbat, as we saw in last week. We saw that even if you need to build the Mishkan, you can't violate the Shabbat. So for sure, to eat the 3 meals on Shabbat, some say it's a biblical mitzvah, but most people say it's only rabbinic in any case. So for sure, you're not going to violate a Torah law by cooking in order to fulfill a rabbinic mitzvah of eating the 3 meals. Also, you can eat 3 meals with... you're assuming you have no other food, but if you have other food, you don't have to necessarily have cooked food for the 3 meals. You can have uncooked food. You can have fruits, vegetables. Hopefully you have bread that you cooked from before Shabbat. But again, this brings us to the major point, is that as the Torah said about the man in the first appearance of the observance of Shabbat for the Jewish people, Moshe tells the Jewish people very clearly, prepare for Shabbat. Do your cooking before Shabbat starts. And before Shabbat enters. And that way you'll have food ready for the 3 meals on Shabbat. And you have to prepare it. And although it's a little tricky though, what about, keeping the food hot or warming it up if it's already cooked. So this is what this section talks about, is that if the food is already cooked, you can't recook it, or can you? Let's take a look. Section 3. Idan, will you read for us, please?
Cooking is prohibited, eating cooked food.
Page 164, yeah.
A fundamental rule of the laws of Shabbat is that one may not create a new entity. During the other 6 days of the week, we emulate Hashem, in whose image we were created, by busying ourselves with creating and developing. We take the raw materials of the world and develop and improve them, thus continuing the work of creation. Just as the Creator ceased creating on Shabbat, so too we are commanded to emulate Hashem's attributes by establishing Shabbat as a day of holiness and rest. It is a day when we desist from creating new things and thus enable ourselves to contemplate the world as Hashem created it and increase our faith. This principle is the principle behind Bishul as well. Cooking is forbidden because it changes the food from raw to cooked, thus giving it a new identity. But if the food is already cooked, there is no prohibition of reheating it, as reheating does not create a fundamentally new substance. Even when the reheating improves the taste, it is still not prohibited, following this accepted principle in Bishul Achar Bishul. There is no prohibition of cooking something that has already been cooked. Therefore, the following question is critical to the laws of Bishul. When is a food deemed cooked? If it is considered cooked, then one may reheat it on Shabbat, and if it is not considered cooked, one may not do so. Some of the greatest Rishonim disagree on this question. Some maintain that if the food can be eaten in a pinch, Bishul no longer pertains to it. However, in practice, it is agreed that a food is considered cooked only when it is fully cooked and when can serve it to guests without feeling compelled to apologize. Before that point, even if one could technically eat it in a pinch, it is not considered cooked. Therefore, in practice, it is important to determine whether a food is mushal kol sorko, fully cooked. As long as it is not mushal kol sorko, any action undertaken to raise its temperature and speed up the cooking process is prohibited by Torah law. For example, the heat of a plata is often uneven. There are hotter and cooler places on its surface. One may not move a food that is not yet fully cooked from its current place to a hotter place on the plata. Similarly, one may not put a towel over the food to contain the plata's heat more effectively. Furthermore, if one removes the cover of a pot in order to check if the food is fully cooked, and it becomes clear that it is not, it is now forbidden to replace the cover because doing so will make the food cook faster. However, if the food is fully cooked, one may move it to a hotter place, and if he took the cover off, he may replace it. Furthermore, one may cover the pot with a towel to preserve its heat. One may do so even if it improves the food's taste, as it does with cholent. Similarly, one may remove fully cooked meat from the freezer and heat it in a way that does not resemble cooking. For it is an accepted principle that after a food is classified as cooked, it is no longer prohibited to reheat it. All of this refers to solid foods. Liquids involve additional issues that we'll explain on in section 5. Cholent is considered.
Okay, stop there for a second. Okay, so the first principle is, like I said before, you have to pre-cook. You have to pre-cook. Yosef, will you erase the board for me, please? You have to pre-cook all your food. It has to be really all fully cooked before Shabbat starts. And then you're safe. Almost. Because there's a principle that says, Ein bishul achar bishul. There's no cooking after cooking. There's no cooking after cooking. So once it's already cooked, it's cooked. It has to be fully cooked. But after that, you can put it on the plata, you can cover it, you can uncover it. We'll see the details later. Okay? So the first stage is, if it's, you have to, before Shabbat starts, you have to cook the food. Right? You have to pre-cook the food before Shabbat. Okay? And then when Shabbat comes, you have cooked food. Okay, once it's cooked, you're pretty much safe, because there's a principle that there is no more prohibition. No more cooking, right? You can't cook it if it's already cooked. So far, so good? Terrific. There's only one problem. And the problem is that everything we said up till now, that is only true about dry foods. But when it comes to liquids, here, there's a debate. Please turn to section 5 in your chapter. That's page 168. We've already learned that there's no prohibition of cooking something that has already been cooked. Therefore, one may reheat cooked food on Shabbat. For example, one may remove cooked fish or fried schnitzel from the refrigerator and reheat them. You put them on the plata, as long as it does not resemble cooking. We'll see the details about that as well. But essentially, once it's cooked, you prepared your food. It's pre-cooked, it's great, you're good to go, no problem. However, there's a fundamental disagreement among the Rishonim whether this principle applies to liquids like soups and sauces. For this purpose, a liquid is something that if left in a bowl would spread out evenly. If it retains its shape, it's considered a solid. According to the Rambam, the Rashba, and the Ran, these are three Rishonim, the principle of Ein Bishul Achar Bishul applies to cooked soup as well. Therefore, based on their opinion, one may take soup from the refrigerator on Shabbat and heat it as long as it does not look like it is cooking. So they say it's the same. This whole distinction between dry and liquid doesn't apply if you're going to follow the Rambam. But most of us, as we're going to see, do not follow the Rambam. Some Yemenites do. We're going to see practically this is a major difference in the laws of Shabbat for Yemenites. But, however, on top of page 169 now. However, according to Rashi, Rosh, Smak, the principle of Ein Bishul Achar Bishul, that there's no more cooking, applies only to solid food. One may reheat them on Shabbat. Liquids, on the other hand, even if they had been fully cooked, may not be reheated once they've cooled off. And doing so is considered bishul. This is because when it comes to solid foods, the primary purpose of cooking them is to create the cooked or baked taste. Once bread is baked, the difference between eating it hot or cold is insignificant. Same is true as fish and potatoes. It makes a little difference whether they're served hot or cold. Therefore, from the moment these foods acquire a cooked or baked taste, their cooking is considered complete. Accordingly, even if they've cooled off, one may reheat them, because cooking no longer affects them significantly. But for liquids, temperature is an integral part of defining them as cooked. There's a fundamental difference between cold soup and hot soup. The same is true of tea and coffee. Therefore, for liquids, we say yesh bishul achar bishul. There is a prohibition of cooking something that has already been cooked. Thus, if a liquid is cooled down, one who reheats it to the requisite heat, we'll get what that is, called Yatzel Edipo, transgresses the Torah prohibition of cooking. Shulchan Aruch rules in accordance with the stringent opinion, and Sephardim follow this ruling. Also, if you skip to the next section, he says that the Ashkenazic practice is also one should not heat up liquids. It's a little more complicated, as we'll see in the next section. But the bottom line is that most of us, most Jewish communities, have trouble heating up liquids on Shabbat. Even if they've been cooked before Shabbat, you still got a problem because you might be re-cooking it if it's a liquid. Okay? So I'll continue reading where I was now. Page 169 in the middle. Thus, for Sephardim, if a cooked liquid is cooled down to below Yatzel Edipo, it's no longer considered cooked and is prohibited by Torah law to reheat it past Yatzel Edipo. Therefore, Sephardim may not take soup out of the refrigerator and heat it. Similarly, if they remove soup from the plata and it cools off, they may not replace it onto the plata. If it is known with certainty the liquid is still yad toledet bo, that's that requisite heat, it may be replaced. Okay. Now there's a question of what if the foods are somewhat solid, but they have some liquid in it? Right? Is it dry or is it liquid? Well, you have some meat, but you have some juice around it, some gravy. Well, is that considered solid or liquid? So if it's sometimes you put it in the refrigerator, the gravy becomes hard, right? It doesn't pour out. It's like congeals. So some people say that's allowed, but as I showed you on the next page, we're careful that the gravy will very quickly turn into liquid, and then you'll be heating up liquid, and you have to be careful about that. Okay, let's go to section 6 now, page 170. As we have seen, according to Rambam, Rosh and Ran, the principle of Ein Bishur Achal Bishur applies to liquids as well as solids. Thus, as long as the liquids, top of page 171, as long as the liquids were fully cooked, even if they've now cooled off, one may reheat them to the tolerable. That's the heat that's considered hot. There are many Yemenite Jews who consistently follow Rambam's ruling throughout halacha. Therefore, if they serve soup Friday night and put it in the refrigerator, they may remove the soup from the refrigerator on Shabbat day and reheat it. This is the law for sauces and other liquids as well. Ashkenazim follow Ramah, whose opinion is a kind of compromise. What's the compromise? There's some Ashkenazim here? People who follow the Ashkenazi rule. If the liquid is cooled off to the point that one normally would therefore not consume it, then one may not reheat it to yad toledet bo. But if it is still warm, one may reheat it to yad toledet bo. This is because the Ramah fundamentally accepts the position of the Rambam that ein bishul achar bishul applies to liquids as well. However, in his opinion, if a liquid is cooled entirely, it's rabbinically prohibited to reheat it. Okay? So, when one who follows now it's tricky, what happens? We have different communities, different groups. Your friend invites you over for Shabbat, and he's Yemenite. He's going to give you hot chicken soup on Shabbat morning. You look at yourself and say, how could he do that? We don't have hot soup in the daytime. We don't heat up cold soup. Well, if he's Yemenite, he's allowed to follow the Yemenite custom. That's the law, according to the Yemenites. If an Ashkenazi would give it to you, you'd be more surprised. But he says you're allowed, it's an accepted custom for that community, it's okay. So you have to know that these are the two major opinions. Okay, one more thing we have to fill in before I take your questions, and we'll discuss it a little bit, is he's mentioned a few times this word yad toledet bo. The question is, if you go back to section 4, which I skipped, there he defines what yad toledet bo. So turn to page 166, with your permission. So when you cook food, how hot is, or let's say you just have no food, okay? You just have water. You heat up water. When does it get defined as being cooked? He said, when it's hot. So how hot is hot? So you have to have a cutoff. You have to know. What if you heat up the water just a little bit? Now it's, instead of, what's room temperature? What's room temperature now? If you take a cold water from the tap, what would it be? 25 degrees, let's say. So you put it on the fire for a few minutes, and it becomes 30 degrees, 40 degrees. You could still put your finger in it, but it's warm. It's starting to get warm. Did you violate cooking yet? Is it cooked? Not yet, because there's a cutoff. The same thing also, let's say you have a pot of hot water, but it's not boiling. It's like 70 degrees, let's say, 50, 60, 70 degrees. You can put your fingers in. And you take your egg, and you put it inside the water. The egg is going to get boiled. Are you cooking it? If it depends, is that considered to be the temperature that's hot? Only if you have a temperature of something that halachically is defined as there's a cutoff. What makes it considered to be hot? So that's the term we use now. That's the title of section 4. It says Yad Soledet Bo. Yad is a hand. Soledet means recoils. If you touch something and it's so hot that your hand feels too hot for you, too hot for touch, that's the halachic definition. As you can see, that's very vague. Nowadays, we're so used to the scientific precision, so we try to translate that into degrees, Fahrenheit, Celsius, however you want to measure it. But we want to have something measured, because our modern devices allow us to be very, very precise. So what is Yad Soledet Bo? What is the temperature at which the hand recoils? So let's see it inside. He says, in the first section, he says, if it's the level that a hand can only stand to touch for a few seconds, so maybe I'll just use Celsius. Not too many Americans here that use Fahrenheit. It's only Idan. But 71 degrees Celsius. Alternately, does it refer to a level of heat that becomes unpleasant for instance after a few minutes? Then it's only 45 degrees. You can't keep your hand in 45 degree water for a few minutes. According to many poskim, since the matter remains in doubt, one must be stringent. Heat of 45 degrees Celsius must be considered capable of cooking. Then one may not put raw food into a pot that has reached a temperature of 45 degrees or higher. Similarly, one may not place raw food near enough to a fire that it could reach 45 degrees or higher. Okay, so this is, in Fahrenheit, it's 113. This is what we're machmir for, that even such a temperature of 45 degrees is considered to be hot enough to cook. Okay, so that's Yad Soledet Bo. There's another definition, a third position, which is even more lenient. But the other, if you look in page 167, in the second paragraph, he says there's another important position that defines Yad Soledet Bo. This position means that food or drink that most people would be able to consume all at once cannot be Yad Soledet Bo. However, most people would be unable to drink or eat it all at once. It's a sign that it's Yad Soledet Bo. Thus, it would be considered cooked, and one may heat it further. And this is probably even more. That's even 80 degrees or even higher. And so we have different opinions about exactly how hot is prohibited. But to be safe, we're machmir 45 degrees or 113 degrees Fahrenheit. What's the boiling point of water? 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is then Celsius.
100 Celsius.
What's 100 Celsius?
Yeah.
100 Celsius, sorry. Yeah. Boiling point of water, we should be able to go. Anyway, so even if it's not boiling, it's still hot enough to cook. And so we have to be wary of this when it comes to cooking various items. We're going to see next some practical applications of this. And one of the biggest ones is, can you make a cup of tea? Very simple. You have it right here on a table. Can I take my tea bag with tea leaves and put it into a cup of hot water? Well, if the water is 45 degrees Celsius, usually it is. Usually it's more than that, 70, 80. It's pretty hot. It's not currently boiling, but it's very, very hot. So maybe you're not allowed to cook the tea on Shabbat. What I do at home is I pre-cook my tea. We're going to see. What we learned so far, I guess 4 terms. Let's see them on the board. And it'll be a nice review for Shmuel, who just came in. Good morning. So we learned that there's a term called bishul. Bishul is cooked. Okay? And then this term is ein bishul achar bishul. And we said it's a question whether maybe by liquids yesh bishul achar bishul, right? Maybe yesh bishul, according to the Sephardic practice and the Ashkenazic practice in general, with some fine details. We're more machmer about liquids, that there is cooking after cooking. Okay, so then we have now new terms. What it defines as something cooked. We said that there's a term called yad soledet bo. What does that mean? The hand recoils from touching it. That's the level. And we said there's a few different opinions, but we try to be machmer even at something above 113 degrees Fahrenheit, 45 degrees Celsius. Okay? Now, and we started off with that you have to have cooking. Cooking is, we said that bishul gets defined with obviously preparing food, with fire, and then we said perhaps we can expand that to in a regular way. That was for the Rav Moshe Feinstein, who said that the microwave, even though there's no fire, because it's the regular way to cook nowadays, that's also considered prohibited cooking on Shabbat. Okay? So now, let's add one more layer of definitions. And then we're going to talk about all the practical examples, okay? And that appears on page 172. Okay? Cooking is normally done by putting food onto a vessel that is on a fire. The question arises, if one has a pot that is not on a fire or on a plata, but that contains a liquid that is yad soledet bo, or hotter, may one place uncooked food into this hot liquid? So let's say you have a pot of boiling water, you have an urn. Okay, we have a hot water kettle right here. Let's do it as practical. So now we're going to heat up the water so that it's going to boil. Boiling is, what's the boiling point? How many Celsius? 100 Celsius. Amazing. So this is going to be 100 degrees Celsius. I'm going to pour some into my cup. Then, can I take a raw egg and put it into my cup? Okay, maybe it's not 100 anymore because it stops boiling the minute you take it out. So that's 90 degrees Celsius. Is that still yad soledet bo? Understand? It's above 45 degrees for sure. It's still going to remain hot for quite a while. I can't drink the tea right away because I'll scald my tongue, right? So you're not allowed to cook, even if it's in a second vessel. As long as you have water here that's hot enough, you can cook things. If it's yad soledet bo, can cook things. This is called the first vessel. This vessel, kli rishon, because it's the vessel that you're cooking the water in, right? That's al ha'esh, because there's a heating element inside, which is heating it up. So it's kli rishon al ha'esh. Now, it's no longer on the fire, right? Because the fire is disconnected from the fire. It's still boiling. See that? See that? It's still boiling. Kli rishon, lo al ha'esh. So probably we'd say that can still cook, even though it's stopped boiling now. It's still above 45 degrees. That's the key factor, right? So you're not allowed to cook in this vessel. You can't put your egg in here. And you can't put your egg in here even if it's not on the fire currently, because it retains its heat. If I pour it down to a second vessel, this is my cup, glass really, is called the second vessel. Because this was the first vessel. My cup is the second vessel. So the second vessel, the question is, we can assume that it's going to cool off a little bit, right? Why does it cool off? Why is it cooler here than it was in the first vessel? What do you say?
Exposed to the air, and
It's exposed to the air. What else is it exposed to?
the cup is also warm.
The cup itself is cooler, right? The cup didn't get heated up by the fire, so the material is cooler. So by definition, it's going to cool down in the second vessel. What if I pour it into?
Oh, it's gonna be messy.
It's going to be messy. What would this be called? Third vessel, kli shlishi. Right, Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi. I'll bring it over so you can see. Rishon.
If you're going to pour it in the third vessel, we need to do it very quick. Like,
If I pour it in, what can I put my egg in here?
no,
Why not?
because it's still very hot.
It'll still be very hot. The main question should be, is it yad soledet bo or not? Is it hot enough to cook? What did we say? The definitions were machmir. As long as it's about 45 degrees, even though it's not boil, it's not 100. So maybe this is 100, this is 70, and this is 50. Okay, maybe. Approximately, let's say. Doesn't matter. All three of them, if it's hot enough to cook, it's prohibited from the Torah. I can't cook my egg in here, or in here. The answer is, some rabbis feel that way, and they agree with Dimitri, that it's a Torah prohibition to cook even in a third vessel. Because if it's hot enough. If it's hot enough, it's hot enough. It's going to cook. That's what cooking is. You define the terms. Other rabbis throughout the ages, throughout the Middle Ages, came up and they said, well, it's not just a question of physics. It's a question of halachic definitions. If you remember back to where we started with, it says cooking is preparing food with fire or in the regular way. So people do cook in this pot. That's what it's for. You don't really cook in a second vessel. Most things you don't cook once it's transferred to a second vessel. And for sure not in a third vessel. Nobody cooks in a third vessel. So some rabbis feel that regardless of the heat, you're not going to get a biblical prohibition in a third vessel. It won't be prohibited from the Torah. Because the definition is not merely physical. It's a halachic definition of what we call cooking. It's the 39 categories of work. And it has to be done in the normal way. Let's take a look inside. Let's read it inside. Page 172, second paragraph. In halacha, only certain types of vessels are considered capable of cooking, while others are not considered capable of cooking. In order to elaborate on this idea, we must define several terms. A kli rishon, pot or pan that has been heated on the fire. A kli sheni is a pot or pan which food or water from a kli rishon has been poured. There is a halach difference between a kli rishon and a kli sheni. Since a kli rishon was on the fire, the walls of the pot, I can't even touch this, become heated from the fire directly. Therefore, it retains its heat for a long time and can cook raw food that is placed in it. Contrast the walls, as we talked about before, of a kli sheni were not heated directly by the fire, so the water or food placed in it cools down quickly. Thus, a kli sheni is not capable of cooking raw food that is placed in it. So according to the Tosfot, they explain this, that even a second vessel cannot cook food. However, there's some foods, there's exceptions, of course. Some foods, including certain types of fish, that are unique in that they cook quickly and easily. These foods, known in halachic literature as kalei habishul, easily cooked foods, can become cooked even in a kli sheni. Thus, cooking kalei habishul is prohibited by Torah law, even in a kli sheni. In addition, even irui from a kli sheni is forbidden. Pouring water. Irui means pouring. So we talked about the three stages. Kli rishon, kli sheni, kli shlishi. What about in between them? If I pour, this is called irui kli rishon. What I pour from the first vessel. And if I take this and pour it here, that would be irui kli sheni. Now it could be that there's a different halachic status of cooking in the Kli Rishon, and doing iru, if I would pour from here onto an egg. Would that have the same status of putting the egg inside the vessel? We have to see what the halacha defines. But halacha lemaise, for kalei b'shul, if there are these foods that are defined as easily cooked, you have to be careful even in Kli Sheni.
I have a question to the students, not you. If you have a volcano nearby of you, and on Shabbat you find some lava flowing, can you put egg close to it in order to cook it?
What do you think?
No.
What do you think?
I think no.
Why?
Because this is still managing a fire, and managing a distance between egg and lava means that you're supposed to manage the heat.
It's considered fire. Now that we didn't discuss it yet, we're going to discuss it. There is the ability to cook in the sun. And that's actually permitted. If you just take an egg and you fry it on the sidewalk, some places it's so hot, you can fry an egg on the sidewalk. That's actually permitted according to Torah law and even rabbinic law. It gets more tricky when you talk about something that was heated by the sun, like a solar panel. Or if you take a fry pan and you put it on the sidewalk, and it's so hot that the fry pan gets hot, and then you put your egg in the fry pan. So here we have a rabbinic stricture. We said earlier, it was kind of quick, that the sages prohibited cooking in a fire. Of course, that's from the Torah law. They said even if something was heated by the fire, like we said just now, the Kli Rishon, what's going to cook it is not the fire. There's no more fire here. But the Kli itself is hot enough to cook. That's rabbinically prohibited. If the vessel, if there was no water in here, if the vessel itself was just, if you heat up a fry pan, and then you cook in the fry pan, that's considered rabbinically prohibited. And so the rabbi said, well, we're not going to know if the fry pan was heated up by the fire or heated up by the sun. And so if something which is a derivative heated up by the sun, it's prohibited. But if it's in the sun directly, like I said, a fry pan on the sidewalk, then, not a fry pan, an egg on the sidewalk, that's actually permitted. But that's a detail that we'll get to, Zat Hashem, soon. Let's go back to the original, to our definitions now. In principle, it would seem, I'm reading page 172 in the last paragraph, it would seem that only a few foods truly qualify as kalei bishul, things that are easily cooked. Nevertheless, some prominent poskim were concerned that we do not know how to differentiate between kalei bishul and regular foods. According to them, only if we know explicitly that a particular food is not included in kalei bishul, like water or oil, what they may it then be heated in a kli sheni. Okay, so basically, we try to avoid putting anything into even a kli sheni, because maybe it's part of the category of kalei habishul. The Talmud says explicitly about oil and water, they're not easily cooked. We know that to cook water, you have to heat it up to 100 degrees, much more than Yad Solerepo. And so that you can be lenient. But we're worried. Here he says here, I don't necessarily agree with this psak halacha. On the top of page 173, he says, one may prepare an instant soup mix by pouring water from a kli sheni onto the dry mix. The truth is, I'm not sure that all the ingredients in the dry soup mix have been pre-cooked. So that would only be allowed if everything was pre-cooked, and then now it's just a question of, is it being recooked? But bottom line is, he says if it's in a kli shlishi, or even pouring from a kli sheni, you're not going to get to a Torah violation. The third type of vessel is known as a kli shlishi, And the poskim agree that a kli shlishi is unable to cook anything. I said there is an opinion which dissents from that, but halachically that's not defined as cooking if it's in the third vessel. So now we're going to get into how do you make your tea on Shabbat. Making your tea on Shabbat, you want the tea fresh. You didn't pre-cook the tea from before Shabbat. The water you have, hopefully you have hot water in an urn. But you can't put your food into the urn. That's kli rishon, al ha'esh. You're going to for sure be cooking it. So I pour out of my urn into my cup. That's a kli sheni. Am I allowed to put my tea bag into my kli sheni? So here comes the question. Is it kalei habishul or not? So we added a few terms now. Okay, is it kli rishon, sheni, and shlishi? First vessel, second vessel, and third vessel. According to the Tosfot, we saw the definition, it's not considered halachically cooking if it's not in the first vessel. Except for some exceptional categories of types of food, which is prohibited even in a kli sheni. But kli shlishi is allowed. So now my tea bag, can I put it into my kli sheni? That's usually what we do. It depends. To define it as kalei habishul, that's the other term we're using now. Kalei habishul, easily cooked foods. Is tea considered to be an easily cooked food? It's a debate. Some modern rabbis feel that it's no problem. Put your tea bag into your cup, because it's kli sheni, and it's not kalei habishul. It's not one of those special foods that's just cooked easily. It takes a while to cook tea. If you're British, you know that you really should steep it for 5 minutes at least. Right? To properly make tea. It has to be steeped. That's not quick. Other rabbis feel no. Within seconds, the tea, you could see it coloring the water, and you can see that it gets the taste. And therefore, don't put your tea bag into your cup. Even though you poured it out of kli rishon and it's in kli sheni, maybe it's considered kalei habishul, right? Easily cooked food. And therefore you're not allowed to put it in your kli sheni. What do you have to do? Pour it into your kli shlishi. You have to sort of use a second cup. So out of your urn, you pour into one cup. And then from that cup, you pour it into a third vessel. It's going to be your second glass. And in there, you're allowed to put your tea bag. Most poskim make their tea that way. However, as I said, there is an opinion that if it's hot, it can still cook even in the third vessel. That's why this halachic sort of principled statements of what's considered cooking, that's so removed from reality. We should be machmir as long as it's boiling hot. And that's what many poskim say, don't make tea on Shabbat.
Make cold tea.
Cold, that's something else.
But most of the tea bags, yeah. I mean, the tea are cooked, it's pre-cooked, right?
Do you think so? I don't think so.
Most of the tea, they're pre-cooked already.
I don't think so.
Tea?
Well, actually,
I
I
don't
agree,
think so.
because if you just put it into the cold water, it will also make a taste, because even
Very good.
like the tea bags, they actually pre-cook, because the normal tea is supposed to have it in the boiled water for a long time before it starts to be a tea. But the tea bags, they're different. Even if you put them into the cold water, they will be a tea.
So this is very good. But first, I'll relate to that in just a minute. So some people say that you shouldn't even make tea in the third vessel. So what do? What I do at home, you had the tea on Shabbat. I pre-cook. I take my tea bags in a glass of hot water from before Shabbat, and I put 10 tea bags in there because I know I'm going to drink 10 cups of tea. And so I have a concentrate of tea. You saw it on top of the hot water kettle. I have a little tea pot with 10 bags of tea in it. And I made that before Shabbat. So it's all cooked. Once it's cooked, ein bishul achar bishul. There's no cooking after cooking. But what if it's liquid? So I'm Ashkenazi, so I keep it hot. As long as we said that Ashkenazim is as long as the liquid is hot, it remains hot, then there's no cooking after cooking, even in liquids. And so that's the method that I use at home. That's a chumrah. It's a stringency. But it's fine, and what most families do is they don't have the pre-cooked, it's called tea essence. They use a tea bag, but they make sure to use it in the third vessel. I will tell you that there is still a debate. There are a great rabbi of mine, students of Soloveitchik, one of the greatest poskim in America. He said tea bags is not kalei habishul. You can put it into the second vessel. You don't have to worry about it. It's not kalei habishul. It's not easily cooked. Other rabbis said, you know what? Tea is not really cooking it at all. Nobody eats the tea. The tea is like a stick which you heat it up. And then the flavor comes out of it, but nobody actually eats the tea. And so, the definition for foods, for items that are not edible, the tea itself is not edible. So the definitions are different. So maybe it's not cooking at all. According to this approach, you might even be able to put it into the Kli Rishon. Others say the fact that the tea, you see that it makes a different color of the water, that doesn't signify cooking. You can do that with cold water. You put a tea bag into cold water, it's going to get some of the color is going to, and the taste is going to come out of the tea leaves, even without cooking it. So it doesn't mean that's prohibited cooking. The fact that the flavor comes out and the color comes out. And so maybe, according to those approaches, tea is a unique example of a food which is not really getting cooked at all. You could put it even to a Kli Rishon. So we learned some definitions, and tea might be an exceptional. Either to be more machmir, gotta go? Okay, feel good. Good to see you. Okay, feel good.
Thank you.
And we'll see you tomorrow, hopefully, okay?
5 days at least.
You're flying?
Not me. It's a family that get some problem. Some people die.
Oh, I'm sorry. So you're going to help them?
Yeah.
Is this in Israel?
No, in Yehusha.
In Nechusha. That's in Israel. So you're going for a couple of days.
Yes.
Feel good. All right. Bye-bye. Okay. Tea is a very unique example. As I said, the range is very wide. Some people say it's impossible to cook tea at all. Some people say tea is so easily cooked. Don't even put it in the second vessel or even in the third vessel. So it's a wide range of approach. But it's a useful example because we do it all the time. And we have the first vessel, and the second vessel, and the third vessel. So I taught you the terms. And there are different approaches about how to prepare tea on Shabbat based on this discussion. So far, so good. Now I'll take your questions, comments.
It also applies to the plata when, let's say, I cook the soup and I put it in the plata all day long throughout Shabbat.
If it was on the plata from before Shabbat, you can keep it on, and it remains hot. You can, we'll see how to use the plata practically. There are other considerations. But in terms of the laws of cooking, if it retains its heat, at least according to the Ashkenazim, it doesn't have to be yad soledetbo the whole time, but it has to be warm. Then you can put it on and off the plata. We'll see with some considerations. But there's no problem of cooking anymore if it retains its heat from when it was cooked. The question of cooking after cooking is if it cools down. If Friday night you took it off the plata and you put it in your refrigerator overnight, which is a good idea, by the way. Things do get spoiled if you leave them on the plata for too long, if it's liquid and it's not hot enough. But then you have the debate whether, most Sephardim and Ashkenazim do not put liquids that are cold back onto the plata, even though they've been cooked. We don't reheat the liquid on Shabbat, whereas Yemenites do. Based on the Rambam. Okay? Now we do have to learn a little bit more about this plata. Because I keep saying that, you can put it on the plata, but you have to be careful of something. The plata is discussed here on, where is the plata discussed? Here. Section 20, please. Every turn the page to 193. Actually, section 19. Section 19. Hachzara. Okay, we're learning another term. Means returning the food onto the fire. Let's read it inside. Stephen, will you read for us section 19 at page 191?
Hazara. Sometimes one remove a pot from the plata on Shabbat in order to remove food, and then wishes to return it to the plata. One may take this action, known as Hazara. Once again, there is a disagreement among the poskim. According to those who are lenient and allow placing food on a platter of bread on Shabbat, maintaining that this does not resemble cooking, as explained in the previous section, one may certainly return the pot to the platter if it had already been there on Shabbat. As long as
Hang on. I think we have to start at section 18. Actually, we're working backwards here. He introduces this issue in section 18. Hanacha. Go ahead.
Hanacha. Now that we have learned the law of Hashaya, leaving food on the heat source before Shabbat, we will now explore the law of Hanacha, placing food on Shabbat somewhere that it will be warmer. As we saw in section 3, the rule of thumb is that one may cook on Shabbat.
One may not cook on Shabbat.
But one may reheat food due to the principle of en bishul aha bishul. Therefore, one may remove fully cooked food from the refrigerator, such as whole chicken and kugel, and reheat them. The poskim disagree regarding reheating a liquid, as explained above in the section 5 to 6. However, the sages prohibited reheating even cooked food if one does so in a manner that resembles cooking, because he may forget that it is a Shabbat and end up raising the flame and transgressing a Torah prohibition. Therefore, one may not reheat a fully cooked food over an open fire, since this is the way one normally cooks. One may reheat food if the method used is clearly not the normal way of cooking. Therefore, one may put a pot with cooked food on top of another pot or on an urn that is on the fire, because this is not a normal way of cooking.
Let me give you another example. Let's say it's hot, it's cold outside, and you have a heater to heat up the room. You know those little coils, radiators, right? What's it used for? For heating up the room, right? It warms up the room. That's not where you cook, right? You cook in the stove top or on a fire. So, but you want to heat up your chicken or your kugel on Shabbat. Everybody agrees you can put it, if it's dry, right? Forget about the liquid. If it's dry, you can take it out of the refrigerator and put it on top of the radiator, because that's not a place for cooking. If you remember back, we said that the sages were very careful not to do something that looks like cooking, right? Okay, so you can put it on the radiator. Because it's clear, you're heating it up and it's dry, it's ein bishul achar bishul. Once it's been cooked, it's been cooked. What about putting it not on the radiator, but you want to put it onto the fire? Well, you're not allowed to. That's where people normally cook. But what if I take a sheet of metal, Okay, here's my
Plata.
here's my fire, and usually I put my pot on top of the fire to cook with, but I'm going to put a sheet metal on top. That's not the normal way of cooking. It separates me from the fire. Is that different enough? Or the plata? The plata is, it's this heating, it's a special device which it has handles, and inside it there's, a coil that heats up, but it's covered over, and it's big, and of course it's connected to a plug, right? And it plugs into the wall, and there's no knobs. It's just for heating up food. This is called a plata, electric plata. Pretty much we're discussing either an electric plata, or if you have a burner with fire, and usually you put a pot over here to cook up fire. Is it too hot?
We open the windows.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
can you turn it off?
Okay, all right, whatever works. Not sure, sort of like an in-between day. A little hot, a little cold, a little bit muggy. Anyways, here's our fire. Here's our fire. There's some kind of, gas. And so you're not allowed to put the pot on the fire. But if you don't have a pot, first you take a sheet, a metal sheet. Maybe there's a little. This is called a blech in Yiddish. It's called a blech. A blech means sheet metal. And you put it on top of the fire. So now these are what we're discussing, the blech and the plata. Says Rav Melamed, page 189. Stephen, read the second last paragraph. Poskim disagree, however.
Poskim disagree, however, about placing food on a plata or a blech. According to many, one may not place even fully cooked food on this, because putting food on a heat source resembles cooking. However, if one places a pot or plate upside down on the plate or blech, he may place food on them, because this is not a normal way to cook. As normally one would not place an obstruction between the heat source and the food. In practice, one may even rely upon a cover that lifts the food up only minimally, like from the top from a metal coffee can, to serve as an obstruction between the plata and the food. However, aluminum foil, which does not lift up the food up at all, is not acceptable. Those who are stringent maintain that one may not place even fully cooked food on an aluminum foil covered plata or blech. In contrast, there are others who are lenient and maintain that since people do not normally cook upon a plata or blech, but only over an open flame, when one places food on a blech or plata, it does not look like he is cooking, and therefore he may place cooked food directly on them on Shabbat. There are others who are lenient when it comes to a plata, since it is especially designed for warming and not cooking, but the stringent regarding a blech, since it is hotter and can serve as a cooking surface.
Okay, so some poskim say that you cannot put your food on top of a blech, but if you want to put a pot on top of a pot, another pot, that's okay. This one is okay. This one's not okay. Because that's not a normal way of cooking. It's clearly that you're just warming it up. This one is very close to what it looks like when you're cooking. Similarly, the same thing on the plata. Just to put the food directly onto the plata would be prohibited. But if you cover it, now let's say I'll take a pot and I'll put it on top of the plata here, but I'll put it upside down. There's nothing in it, but it's an upside down pot. And then I take my pot with food in it, and I put it on top of that. Okay? Now again, the truth is I'm drawing food, but I don't mean liquid here, I mean solid. Right? This has to be solid food, there has to be some chicken inside, right? With not liquid. So that's what we do. Myself, I'm referring to my family. I'm an Ashkenazi. Most poskim are Machmer. They say you don't put food directly onto the plata. You have to put first some kind of a separation on the plata. We actually have a special mat which serves as that upside down pot. Some people use a baking pan that's very thin, so the food still gets hot, but it's not directly on the plata. Other Rav Ovadia Yosef and other poskim are very more mekel, and they say you can put the food you want to heat up directly on the plata, but not on a blech. Some people say no, the blech too. Directly on the blech is fine. Nobody cooks with a blech. Nobody cooks with a plata, and therefore we don't have this problem of it looking like you're cooking. So this is a debate, and there's room, a lot of room to be lenient. Look on top of page 191. Stephen, read it in practice.
In practice, since many poskim are stringent, it is preferable to be stringent and refrain from placing a pot with cooked food directly onto the platter or plate. However, those who wish to be lenient may, since the law is rabbinic, one may important poskim have offered compelling reasoning in support of their lenient position. One who has a set family custom on the matter should follow this custom. One may put fully cooked food on a heat source that is not normally used for cooking, such as a radiator, even if the radiator is very hot, since it does not resemble cooking. Similarly, one may put fully cooked food on top of the kerosene or gas heater that is meant to heat the home as long as something separates the fire from the food, and one does not warm up food or water that during the week. But if it is used during the week for heating food and water, then the law pertaining to it are the same as those for a gas plant. Thus, according to most poskim, one must put an upside down pot on it, and only then one may reheat the food. Following the more lenient position, it is enough to put a black on the heater or place the food upon it.
Okay, so far so good. So now you understand this issue of the plata. It's a very useful tool. I think it was created here in Israel. The electric plata is much. I grew up with a blech. On my home, we had not gas, but in America, in Canada, we had an electric range. But we had this piece of sheet metal, which we put on top of the stovetop on the Erev Shabbat after everything was cooked. We wanted to heat something up. We put it on top of the blech. But the stringency is to not put it directly on top of the blech, but on top of another pot or an overturned pot. Something that separates it from the blech, so it shouldn't be so similar to cooking. Same thing with the plata. The plata, I really think that Rav Ovadia Yosef makes a lot of sense. It was designed as a heating up element. It's not for cooking. Nobody cooks on a plata. It's there. It was created for the halachic purpose to be something which heats up food that's already pre-cooked. And so it makes a lot of sense that you could put the food directly onto the plata, but I keep my family custom and I make sure that there's a separation first. A minimal separation. Like you said, some overturned metal tops of jars or something like that. Whatever it is, this is the law of reheating Shabbat. It has to be cooked though. It's only if it's pre-cooked. And it has to be dry if you're Sephardi or Ashkenazi. Only the Yemenites can reheat cold soup on Shabbat. Shabbat, you can keep it on from before Shabbat if it's going to stay healthy. If it's going to stay warm, there's no problem. As long as you're not placing it down on the fire on Shabbat, it can remain. Yeah, that's the problem. Putting things onto the fire on Shabbat. Maybe you're going if it's liquid and it's cold, you might be yesh bishul achar bishul. Might be cooking after cooking. For liquids, our custom is to be machmir, and we don't re-cook liquids because it sort of lost all of its cooking when it got cold. The whole point of soup is that it has a special taste when it's hot soup. And so doing that, re-cooking the soup on Shabbat is prohibited. But if it's dry, schnitzel, chicken, kugel, all those things which are dry, you can reheat them. How do you reheat them? Not directly on the fire. It's rabbinically prohibited. We have to put it on a covered fire in a way which is not the normal way of cooking. So either a plata, or a blech, or an additional layer with a pot or an overturned pot, which makes it farther away from the normal way of cooking.
And this is the standard for most poskim,
Yes.
and it's a more machmir interpretation. So if you're not,
Yes.
it will be.
Sephardim don't have to worry about the extra pot on top of the plata. They can put it straight down on the plata. And as Rabbi Melamed says, if you really want to, if you don't have a family tradition, you can be lenient and put it directly onto the plata or the blech. As long as it's a covered fire, and as long as it's dry and fully cooked, you're okay to reheat foods out of the refrigerator on Shabbat. Okay, is that clear? Or you can also put it on the radiator in a place which is not normally cooked. Everybody agrees about that.
And if it's a whole pot of soup, you just keep it fairly warm on the platter. If it stays on the platter from before,
It's fine. You can keep it there. Yeah, you can keep it there. If it's fully cooked and it stays warm, according to the Ashkenazi, it doesn't have to be so hot that it's yad soledet bo. It just has to be warm, so that the warmness has not left it, and so you're not recreating it on Shabbat. The Sephardim are more machmir on that. Sephardim say it has to retain its level of heat. It has to be yad soledet bo, at least 45 degrees. And there you might have a problem. If you have a plata which has, right, the heating elements are in one area stronger than another area. Like in some platas, you have a hot area of the plata and a cool area of the plata. It's a piece of sheet metal, but underneath it, this element gets hotter than the other element, or there's not, it doesn't go everywhere. So Sephardim have to be more careful about that to make sure that the food is yad soledet bo, 45 degrees. If you want to move it from one part of the plata to the other part, if it's hotter or colder, if you're Ashkenazim, as long as it's warm, it's fine. You can move it to a hotter place, a cooler place. But according to the Shulchan Aruch, it has to be yad soledet bo. And there's different platas. Some platas are hotter, some are cooler, until you find the plata that you like. Sometimes people serve me soup on Friday night even. Say they kept it on the plata after they cooked it up before Shabbat. You remove it from the cooking place and you put it onto the plata. And then you go to shul for an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is. You come home. You want to have hot soup. Sometimes the soup is not hot. I don't like it when it's not hot. I like to have my soup hot. What's the problem? The plata that they use is not very hot. Some platas are more hot, some are less hot. And as long as you put it, you can have a very hot plata, as long as you're putting the food there from before Shabbat, and then the food that you put on Shabbat, as long as it's dry, fully cooked, you can have a very hot plata, and that's the way that kind I like, because I like my soup hot. But sometimes you get served a cooler soup because the plata doesn't work so well. And all right.
The clay it's a clay sheni or shlishi. The bowl, the soup.
Once you get it, that's right. You're getting it after it's been transferred from the pot with a ladle into your bowl, and each time you transfer it, it loses some of its heat, and then maybe it takes a while till they serve everybody, and your bowl was sitting out on the counter for a few minutes. By the time you get your bowl of soup, it's like lukewarm.
Can you put the bowl on the platter?
Sorry?
Preheat the bowls. Put them on.
You could preheat the bowls, yeah, sure. Anyways, that's they say in Hebrew, tzarot shel ashirim, the trouble of rich people, rich people's problems. It's not really, but it's Oneg Shabbat. It's nice to have. Okay, so we learned the laws of cooking, and we did skip around a little bit, but the primary things. The most important things I think we covered. There's one other thing I want to teach you about the plata, and that is on page 180. Go back to section 12. Okay, Yosef, will you read for us?
Megis is how we read it.
Megis.
Megis.
Megis. Stirring or mixing. That's right. Megis, there's another Hebrew word. So many Hebrew words we're learning today.
Stirring food in a pot helps it cook better and more evenly, and therefore one who stirs food that is not fully cooked on Shabbat transgresses the Torah prohibition. The act of stirring is known in rabbinic literature as megis, even if the food is no longer in the fire. As long as it is not fully cooked and it has yad soledet po, it is forbidden by the Torah law to stir it. In light of this, the sages forbid removing food from a pot that contains food that is not yet fully cooked, even after the pot is removed from the plata, because the resultant movement in the pot would constitute stirring. Only when the food has cooled down and is no longer yet soledad may one remove the food he wants. However, once the food has finished cooking and is ready to be eaten, there is no longer a problem of bishul, and one may remove whatever he wants from the pot. Shulchan Aruch. This is the custom of many Sephardim. In any case, one should not stir the food while it is in the fire, because this resembles cooking. Yolkut Yosef. The custom of Ashkenazim and some Sephardim is to be more stringent. As long as the food is still on the plata, if it is fully cooked, letchila, they do not remove any food. Rather, they remove the pot from the plata and only then remove what they want. If they wish to return the pot to the plata afterward, they must be careful to follow the principles for returning food to the plata. Section 19. In cases of necessity, even those who are usually stringent are lenient and allow fully cooked food to be removed from a pot on the fire. For example, if a pot is resting on an uncovered fire, so that if it is removed from the fire, it will be forbidden to replace it. Section 19. One may remove food from the pot while it is still on the fire. This is because technically once the food is fully cooked, there is no longer a prohibition of megis. Hazon ish. What's this again?
Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata.
Shemirat Shabbat. Everyone agrees that if a pot or a metal urn is filled with boiling water before Shabbat and then left on the plata during Shabbat, one may remove water from it on Shabbat.
Okay, so what this is telling us is that, let's say you've done everything right. You fully cooked your food before Shabbat. You took it off the regular fire and you put it onto your plata. And now it's warming, keeping your food warm, and you're going to start eating. So do you take your spoon and put it into your pot, your ladle? Do you take it, put it into your pot, and dish out the chicken soup? We're machmir, because putting the spoon or the ladle into the pot while it's on even the plata is too similar to stirring or mixing. Now, if the food was not fully cooked, that could be a Torah prohibition, because you could be stirring it, that could cause it to cook. So what we do is first we take the pot off of the plata. We put it on the counter. Then we put in our ladle or our serving spoon, and we dish it out into the individual dishes. Now, the Chazon Ish was asked, famous rabbi from Bnei Brak, he was asked, we have a problem. When we, in a big yeshiva, the pots, they don't even use a plata. They have a big pot for cooking the chilent in, and it's on the fire. It continues to remain, and that's allowed because they leave it in there from Erev Shabbat. They're not putting it on there on Shabbat. It doesn't have to be a plata. As long as it's fully cooked from before Shabbat, it's okay. But the problem is, some really from people wanted to get up early for the early minyan. They wanted to go to Vatikin. And after Vatikin, they said, we want some cholent. There's 10 people, 20 people, 30 people. They want to have some of the cholent now. But the other 100 people in the yeshiva, they're going to have they wanted their cholent hot 2 hours later, after the regular minyan, at 11 in the afternoon, not at 9 in the morning. So the question is, can we take our serving spoon and stick it into the cholent, which is in a pot on the fire, and serve ourselves some cholent early? Problem is, you never stick a serving spoon into a pot that's on the fire. That's what we just learned. Because it looked too careful, it's like stirring, it's too much. Maybe the food's not cooked. The food is fully cooked, it's cholent, it's been there for 12 hours. There's a problem. So the Chazon Ish said, if push comes to shove, you're allowed to take the food out of the pot, if it's fully cooked, if it cannot be removed. Because if they would remove the cholent, we wouldn't be able to put it back for the rest of the 100 people who want to have the cholent 2 hours later. So best is to take it off the fire, dish out some cholent, put it back. But if the cholent is liquidy, you're going to have trouble. With liquid, we don't put it back on. It's according to the Shulchan Aruch, even if it's not yad soledetbo, you're not allowed to put it back on. If you're Ashkenazi, as long as it's still warm, you can put it back on the fire. But this special type of cooking dish, they didn't have a plata. It remained inside the cooking pot. And so he was makel for them. And he said, if you cannot remove it and put it back, as long as it's fully cooked, you can take out the food. And you're not stirring, you're just taking. Yeah, so you take gently, and for sure it's fully cooked anyways. So this is a leniency. But in general, what we do is we always take the food off the plata before serving it. Because of this issue, this rabbinic prohibition of megis, if it's not fully cooked, it could be a Torah prohibition. So it makes sense that we don't serve the food directly from the plata. And if you want to keep it hot for somebody else, that's what we're going to learn now. How do you take it off, serve it out, and put it back on? What if it's liquid? You're not allowed to put it back on if it's liquid. So take a look. Section 19. Section 19. We have 3 conditions. Sometimes, okay, Shmuel, will you read for us section 19 on page 191?
Sometimes one removes a pot from the platter on Shabbat in order to remove food, and then wishes to return it to the platter. One may take this action known as achzara. Once again, there is disagreement. According to those who are lenient and allow placing food on a platter or left on Shabbat, maintaining that this does not resemble cooking, as explained in the previous section, one may certainly return a pot to the platter if it had already been there on Shabbat, as long as the food is fully cooked, the fire is covered. If the food is not fully cooked, one violates the Torah prohibition of cooking. As long as the fire is covered, there is no concern that he will turn the flame.
Go ahead.
Those who are concerned that placing cooked foods on the platter on Shabbat resembles cooking, and thus forbid doing so, view returning food to the platter differently. Since the food was already on the platter before Shabbat, returning it does not resemble cooking. Therefore, as long as it is clear that one is simply returning the pot to the platter and not placing it there for the first time on Shabbat, he may do so. In order to make it clear that this is achzara and not intentional placement, 3 conditions must be met. Number one, the pot must not be placed on the floor after it had been removed.
Yeah.
Okay. And the person removing it must have in mind that he will return the pot to the platter. Okay. Number three, the person must not keep hold of the pot until he returns it.
Must keep hold.
Sorry. The person must keep hold of the pot until he returns it to the platter while he's serving.
Yes.
But if there is a great need to return the pot to the platter, because that is the only way that there will be hot food at the meal, that even if these three conditions are not met, one may return to the food to the platter. This is because the food is still, in fact, being returned to the platter and not being placed there for the first time.
That's a big leniency of Rav Melamed. Not everybody agrees with it. But let me just explain what's going on here. Usually we said, right, that most Ashkenazim are machmir. We don't put the food out of the refrigerator directly onto the plata on Shabbat. We put it on top of another pot, or an upside down pot, right? To make sure it doesn't look like cooking. But now, I'm not taking it out of the refrigerator. I'm taking it off the plata, serving, and putting it right back on the plata. So that's allowed. Best is if you keep, there's 5 conditions. Number 1 is, it's got to be fully cooked. Okay? Number 2 is, he says here,
Not on the floor.
you don't put it down on the floor, you put it down on the counter. Number 3 is, you hold on to it. So with one hand you're serving out, the other hand you're holding on to it. The next condition is you have to have in mind, I'm taking off the pot to put it back on. Okay? And what's the last condition? I can't remember now. He has it as 3. I added on the obvious condition that it's got to be fully cooked.
Is liquid?
That it's a covered fire, obviously. We're only talking about a plata. That's the 5th one. So it's got to be cooked and a covered fire. And then you could return it directly onto the plata or the blech without an extra pot if it's returning and not taking it out of the refrigerator. So these the 5 conditions. That's the way I learned it. He has it as 3. And then he says, as long as it's cooked and it's covered fire, you can even be lenient with the other 3 laws, as long as it's, of course, doesn't cool down, and it's fully cooked. That's the main thing. So that's usually the way we handle our food with the plata on Shabbat. Friday night, for example, we have in our home a child who davens for a very, very long time. We come home from shul, let's say we eat at 7 o'clock, he'll come home and have his Shabbat meal at 9 o'clock. So we don't wait for him, because he's on his own time schedule, that's fine. But we want him to have hot soup too. And we want to have hot soup too. So this is what my wife does. Usually she's the one who serves the soup, but it's what I do also. When I serve, I take my chicken soup off the plata, and I put it on the counter with one hand. I'm intending in my mind, this chicken soup's fully cooked. I have in mind, I'm going to put it back. With the other hand, I take my ladle and I serve out the soup, serve out the whatever soup, and then I cover the pot again and put it back on the plata. It remains hot for another 2 hours until he comes and he gets his soup as well. That's the laws of hachzara, returning a pot to the fire. The following morning, sometimes we have all sorts of vegetable dishes, chicken. We take it out of the freezer sometimes even. We put it on the plata, but here we use an extra layer of separation with an uncovered pot, overturned pot, cover, or something like that. We make a separation just to be machmir, but as long as it's dry, it's not liquid, you can put that on the plata on Shabbat day with no problem. Sounds good? All right, we covered a lot of ground. We did most of the laws of Bishul. There's a few very important practical implementations of these laws. We only talked about soup, cholent, chicken, reheating, and tea, right? We talked about, but there's a few other ramifications which we're going to have to see tomorrow, which are bigger questions like modern devices. We have solar heaters, we have water heaters which are heating up the hot water in our taps. All those things have to be discussed tomorrow, and a few other details with all sorts of modern inventions we have of Shabbat ovens with a Shabbat switch. We'll talk about that. Finish up the laws of Bishul, Ezrat Hashem, tomorrow. Okay? All right.